So this is the last part of the dress-up closet, and there is a little bit of everything in this video. To start, I'm going to be framing out the vanity mirrors, as well as I made about a 3-inch wide frame, so it's extended, and that will hold some lights I got on Amazon. So the one edge was pretty easy. I basically just made some L-shaped molding so that a piece of 1/4-inch plywood could sit in it, and that 1/4-inch plywood would have holes for the lights, so all the wiring will be hidden inside the frame. The problem with the other side is because the mirror has depth, as well as the fact that I have that spacer in the back, I had to create a little bit more intricate piece of molding so it has an extra lip. Basically looks like a Z or an S, and that lip will set on top of that indented piece. You can see all I did was I kind of made this extra frame that the mirror can sit on. These have adhesive stickies, so that's why you can see in place why I needed that kind of intricate piece of molding, because that sits on top of that inner frame. So once I had those two pieces, you can see the L bracket frame is already set up on the outside. I could cut that, like I said, they're about 3-inch wide strips of 1/4-inch maple veneer ply. It sits inside that groove. I roughly mounted the lights on there to get the spacing I wanted, and then I taped the pieces together so I could drill both holes at once, and I just went through and drilled some holes in there for the lights. The sizing of my hole saw kit didn't really match up well with the vanity lights, so the hole's a little bit bigger than I would have liked, but it ended up working out because it was easier to paint with these not fully set into place. And then I could just go around and tack everything in place. You can see on the bottom I drilled a little hole so that the wiring for the lights could go out the back of the cabinet and plug into the wall. Now obviously the wiring for these was not ideal, because the intended purpose is to just kind of mount them roughly on the outside of a mirror. So it had an inline control switch which I had to mount a little cleverly, and then the wire had to go out the back side. All of it ends up being hidden. It was a little bit of a pain to figure it out. And then that is basically what that looks like with the frame. The next day I came in the shop and I was kind of pressing on the mirror, and because I don't have a solid back, you could see it just doesn't hold in place very well. And like I said, kids are really rough on stuff. This is that acrylic mirror. It's not glass, so I wasn't concerned about it. I didn't want to be concerned about it breaking. So what I decided to do, which is sometimes a tough decision in the shop because no one wants to rebuild anything, I decided to make a solid removable backer. I could build my frame on top of this backer. I decided to scrap the mounting they had, and I used double-sided tape to cover the whole surface of the back of this, not just the 4 corners, and then I rebuilt this. So you can see I could keep my L bracket across the back side of the frame, but for the front I'm going to have to remake that a little bit. You can see how the veneer ply fits into place, and then I just had to recut that inner frame. It's a much smaller indentation on the back now, so I do lift up a piece. You can see it right there. This mirror is basically a 1/16 of an inch, so it's just a slight groove I put on the back. This is one of those things, like I said, no one likes to remake stuff, but I was really happy with how this second version turned out. It really wasn't that time consuming because I reused that outer edge, and everything ended up looking a little bit cleaner. So I don't think I film it, but eventually these lights get double-sided tape as well, and they set in those holes, but like I said, I kept them loose for painting purposes so it was easier to paint around them. So the concept of this, like I said in earlier videos, was it converts from a runway into a vanity. So I just have this piece of 1/2-inch plywood. I'm going to cut out the back so it sits flush up against the vanity. There's many ways to do this. I just decided to make a series of curves on the table saw, and that is how that fits into place. So I also was trying to think of really clever ways to attach this. Like I said, there are some measurements if you want to pause and recreate something like this. But at the end of the day, you'll see I decided to just store that tabletop on the other side of the cabinet. So in order for it to have something to set on, I'm going to be making some blocks. These blocks are going to have a dual purpose. They're going to hold the wires on one side for the vanity and the remote control for the disco ball I have yet to mount on the other side. This was just simple MDF blocks. All of this stuff is going to get painted, so it doesn't really matter what it's made out of. I had this scrap laying around. I like MDF for circumstances like this. It's very dense. And then I just had some scrap. This is actually a thin piece of a 2x6 I had laying around that I faced the fronts with. For that portion with the remote control, I just drilled 2 holes for the wires to come out, and then I split that down the middle so that that control panel could be mounted. The only problem with this was now the mirror is connected to this block, and that was a little bit of a pain to take apart and put back together. But these lights are pretty cool. You can adjust the brightness as well as the hue of the lamp. They go from cool white to that more yellow warmish white, which I like. And then, like I said, after that, I went to making for the mounts for the tabletop. Like I said, I was thinking of ways to make it hinged and all of that, and I just decided to make my life a little bit easier. It was getting towards crunch time for this. I just made these little brackets for the side so that this can slide in and out. And once clothes are set up in here, it kind of hides the fact that this is on the side there. So then I used a little bit of a spacer on the top so that there was enough room for this. And all these sliding parts I end up putting wax on, and they slide really nicely. To finish off the inside of the cabinet, I'm going to be putting some open shelving. So this is just 3/4 inch ply I'm cutting some thick dado grooves into, and I'll have cantered lever shelves that are made out of poplar. I had scrap poplar. It's nice. It fits into that 3/4 inch dado perfectly. And I lied, that's actually 1/2 inch ply on the side. You can see I mounted it with a spacer so that this desk can now slide in and out, and it won't tilt forward. It's trapped in place by these shelves. So you can see I just went through and cut that poplar, and then I could slide those all into place. And like I said, all this comes apart, so a lot of this is not permanently attached in place, but once it's finally done, all of that will be glued and attached. Now you can see the desktop can slide out, slide back in, and like I said, the wax makes all the movement a little bit easier. So now was the time for the disco ball, and I was originally thinking of mounting it in the top like this, but the vanity mirror now sticks out too far. So I decided to make this swinging arm, which actually worked out nicely because the lights were a little more vibrant the further away they were set from the vanity. But I couldn't have this stick out so that my pieces couldn't close. So what I decided to do was make a recessed groove at the top for this to sit into, and then it could swing fully down as well as swing fully up and out of the way. That was kind of important to me as well. So I just used a router to cut a groove, and then I just have a scrap piece of ply. I'm going to drill 2 holes in the edge. I'll put a 3/8 inch dowel in there, and those will be the pins that will hold this in place. So that's how I'm making it swing. I just cut these little kind of shallow mortises in the front. Same thing, I use this doweling jig. This is a jig I did for a tool review, and it's one of the few tool review tools that I still use. It's a pretty solid piece of equipment. And then you could see how this piece now fits in place. Now I keep this, I will eventually put plugs in this so that it holds in place, but for the time being I wanted this to be removable. You can see how now it could swing fully out of the way. I added a little chamfer to the back side of this so that it sets a little bit nicer. I just did that quickly with an oscillating tool. So that's what that finished piece looks like. Like I said, I rounded over the top of this as well, and now that sits in there quite nicely. So in order to finish this up, I wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I needed this to hang up in space, so I made these wings that would attach to the top side of the two wing cabinets. I decided to do that because as I was working on this moves quite nicely, which I wanted, but those two wings move a lot. So when this is open, not only will this hold up the disco ball, but it will hold those two wings in place. So this was pretty simple. I just mounted some pieces of 3/4 inch plywood to the top. I drilled I think I had 5/8 inch dowels in the shop. On the drill press, I used that hole to drill into the top of the cabinet. I added a dowel, and then I also cut recesses in this so that these wings slide into place and everything is held. The problem with this was that disco ball is actually quite tall with height, so when I closed this, it stuck out too far. I thought that I could swing this back into the cabinet and the doors would close. It looked great, it held the wings in place, which is what I was looking for, but it wasn't going to close. So I decided an easy fix for this was I just made the mounts go on the top of the cabinets instead. So I basically reversed it. I put the bolts on the top of the cabinets, the dowels on this piece of plywood. You'll have these wings sitting on top of the cabinets, which doesn't really matter, but that holds everything in place. I now had those two grooves set in the back, which serve no purpose. I don't think I filmed it, but I kind of created a curve in this piece to make it work a little bit better. One of the last things I decided to do before I paint this is I'm cutting an arch out of these two sides. When I first put this together and I opened it up, I thought it kind of created a little bit too much of a narrow space where the two cabinets open. And I went back and forth a lot on deciding whether or not I wanted to cut these arches out. The whole time I was building this, I was deciding whether or not I wanted to do that. I finally decided to cut them. I was really happy I did. It kind of opened up the whole piece. I decided to make some little peg mounts for jewelry on there. I had this scrap mahogany that was already at an angle, so I could hold it at its angle on the drill press. I could drill straight holes into it, and then just by the fact that it was an angle, once I put those pins in there, they had a slight angle upwards, so nothing could slide off of them as well. And then those fit in between the shelves and that disco ball mount. And I've been to my sister's house a couple of times since I gave this to my niece, and like I assumed, it's never been closed, so I spent all this time making this fit into one cabinet, but I knew it was going to be open most of the time. To finish off the veneer on this, like I said, my cabinets were a little bit too wide. They didn't close perfectly, so I just, like I said, you saw I had that, I used some clamps to hold it together, and I found the right thickness of veneer for both sides, which is about a 1/16 of an inch, and I just veneered the entire outer edge, so now that closes perfectly. To finish this up, you can see I have all of the parts. The purple I got because that is the paint left over from her room. Obviously, wall paint is not necessarily ideal for furniture like this, but it does work. And then I had some white trim paint left over from a job. So basically all the cabinetry was going to be purple, and then all of the parts that kind of came out were going to be white. And I like the way that two-tone kind of highlighted all the elements of the piece. Once everything was painted, I could just reassemble it. This was really the only part that was difficult to get back in place. Obviously, paint, even though I didn't paint the sides of this, adds a slight depth to everything, so keep that in mind if you do it this way. But in general, like I said, everything kind of went back into place pretty easily, and that is essentially going to be the bulk of this build. So this took the better part of an afternoon to put everything back together, but I was pretty happy with the way that all of it turned out. So this is just putting the carpet back into place, adding the bolts to that dowel rod, and then obviously the mirror back in place. This was a little bit difficult as well because of the wires. Make sure that the desktop works, and then I could slide these shelves back into place. It was also nice to be able to finally mount those lights in place as well, and then take the protective film off the mirror was also nice. And that is basically, like I said, like that looks like the disco ball slides into place. I finished this up. Her birthday actually fell on Thanksgiving this year, and I finished it. This was Thanksgiving morning that I finished this up and delivered it. I didn't film it, but I put these two clasps on the front so everything holds in place. And that's basically it for this build. We'll be starting something new next week.